The coronavirus had taken the world by storm, the great American election, an economy that was slowly starting to crumble around the world, Black Lives Matter protests, and one game.
Oh my god, I am the imposter.
And what imposter?
No! Simon! Simon! Simon!
It would soon become a worldwide trend, with 30 billion views on all social media platforms in a month, and played by 100 million people. A year before the game's release, its producer, Inner Sloth, almost scrapped the project. They were going to shelve the game they had written and never release it, because they didn't have a single penny of money left. However, in 2019, at the last minute, they decided to scrap the game. Today, they are a huge company with millions of dollars in revenue. And this is their story of incredible rise and tragic fall, with 99.56% player loss. In Sweden, Marcus Bromander in early 2013, when he was going to university, he didn't want to finish school and work for a company, so he was looking for ways to be more independent. At that time, he was trying to develop his own games at home in his free time. Then he met this guy called Forrest Willard, who was a software developer at the same school. But they were not very close at first. Years passed, and after our friends graduated, Forrest started working full-time at Microsoft. Marcus was also a full-time game developer. Of course, they kept in touch during this period. One day they met at a place and started chatting about games. Marcus said he didn't know how to code very well, and he was really good at drawing. Forrest was a good software developer. Then they decided to combine their skills and form a team. They named this team Inner Sloth. For a year they worked on this game, which Marcus developed with a free game engine called Stickman, but then they realized that it wasn't very interesting. The next step was to make something that could be developed faster. After 3 months of development, in January 2015, they released a mobile game called Dig to China. It basically had a simple structure, where you dig the ground and try to reach China. After developing and successfully launching their first game, the two friends embarked on another simple project that would last 6 months. It was an online game that looked exactly like this, where you fight in a small area. It wasn't successful and they went into a long period of stagnation. Forrest was still a full-time computer engineer at Microsoft. He was also doing little projects with Marcus, but they were worthless. They were not productive in their projects together. Also, Marcus and Forrest lived 600 kilometers away from each other. Their distance had a negative impact on the games. During this slow period, Marcus worked on a game he made himself called the Henry Stickman, and it was successful. The money he made with this game would give him peace of mind for a while. Then he said, "This can't go on like this," and decided to move closer to Forrest. Forrest left Microsoft after Henry's success. In October 2017, they decided to work together full-time. Their first full-time project was to revisit their old online games. They lost an incredible amount of time and money here. The project was renewed but failed again. This game gave them an idea. They took this concept that you know as mafia or werewolves, where players try to solve each other's identities, and put it online. When they first released it, it wasn't called Among Us. It was called Space Mafia. You can even see it if you check the URL. As development progressed, they changed the name and decided that Among Us was a better option. So our game was released on mobile platforms on June 15, 2018. However, in the first 7 months, they couldn't go beyond 30 to 40 online players. In fact, their first version was so buggy that players were constantly breaking out of rooms, and that's why the game's scoring was incredibly low. On November 16, 2018, they released it on Steam. During this time, some online bugs were fixed and sound effects were added. However, the project still didn't gain many players. At the beginning of 2019, The project was earning so little that they thought about taking it off the market, just like their previous projects. They were very close. They had already planned to move on to a new game. They gave it 1 or 2 more weeks as a last chance before they took it off the market. And I'm glad they did. Because during this period, Brazilian and Korean streamers like Zada started to stream the game, and thanks to these streams, the game received more than 50,000 sales. First, Mexico. It became popular in Brazil and Korea. In May 2019, it reached 1 million downloads. The vast majority of players were from these countries, so our team got fired up and quickly started bringing new features to the game. Costumes, colors, new maps, and a story that players could relate to. But even though Among Us reached these download numbers, it still wasn't doing well. Even at this time, there weren't many active players, and those who were playing were getting in for free on mobile. According to the production team, this was the end of the road. This was the maximum. It was unplayable beyond that. They were planning to stop bringing updates to Among Us and start a new project. In a last-ditch effort, our producer friends put the game 50% off in 2020, just in time for the summer sales. The famous European publisher, Sodapoppen, played the game during this period. This was almost the first time the game was seen in Europe, and it was very popular. Then, XQC and all the other big publishers got involved. Soon Among Us became a worldwide internet phenomenon. In the first month, it exploded on TikTok. It got 17 billion views and almost 5 billion views on YouTube. On September 3rd, the game had 3 million downloads, and on September 22nd, 19 days later, that number increased by 97 million to 100 million downloads. At the end of September, 3.9 million instant users were reached on all platforms, and record after record was achieved. It was reported in the national media. It reached everywhere in the world. Yes, it was a really good time. When everyone was locked up at home because of Corona, the game spread all over the world. But the process was not smooth. Before we got to the sinking part, our friends announced that they would make Among Us 2 with a quick decision after this incredible influx of players. New featured characters, pets, paid costumes, maps with different traps. However, within 1 to 2 weeks, they had to backtrack because they couldn't even balance Among Us, which they were actively trying to play at that moment. So on September 23, 2020, Among Us 2 was cancelled. So why couldn't they stabilize it? One of the most important reasons was that the free servers they got from Amazon were constantly crashing. The places where the game was played the most were random online lobbies, and there were so many cheats that they could kill everyone without imposter. You could throw the game back into the lobby. You could send messages to millions of users in the game. They actually did this to get them to vote for Trump in the US presidential election in 2020. That's how they sent messages to users. In a short time, the cheats had so frustrated the players that most of the lobbies were unplayable, because it is impossible to prevent it. On mobile, the game was free, and you could download the rigged versions directly and connect to the game easily. Banning didn't do anything, so they took the first blow and lost users quickly. Since the structure of the game offered the same thing every time in general, after a while it inevitably became repetitive. They couldn't bring the updates with big innovations to this period when their users were most active. This is how a large player base left the game, because they were bored of doing the same things, but the biggest blow was experienced in 2022 and beyond. As Corona slowly lost its impact, global consumption habits returned to normal, so people were spending less time online. There were fewer and fewer publishers playing. New popular games like Among Us were born. In short, the agenda changed rapidly. To summarize, Among Us lost 99.56% more players than when it was most popular. Of course, it would not be right to say that it is completely bankrupt, because there is still a small audience playing the game. Today, however, it continues to lose users, but that's not the point. The lesson to be learned is the turning points in these stories. A lot of games that didn't work. A big project that was almost shut down and shelved. And then, with a little luck and a lot of consistency, success. Inner Sloth, the maker of Among Us, continues to employ 17 people. Since the release of Among Us in 2018, the company has earned an average of more than $150 million every year. The game has become a cult hit, no matter what anyone says.